In this video, we will cover how to group items that came from the estimate so that they can be bought out. So we'll click on the Group Items button on the navigation bar, and here we see a list of all the items that came from the estimate. You'll notice a few things about this window is number one, there is a view drop-down, and the default option and the only option right now is to group by phase, group phase and phase. And using that view, when we click on all items, then of course on the right side we see all of the items from the estimate. When we click on a given group phase, we see only the items that are underneath that group phase. But also if we expand any one of these group phase nodes, we can see the individual phase codes, and if we click one of those, then we see only the items for those specific phase codes. So the list on the left, you can think of that as almost like a quick filter. We're able to filter the entire item list down to specific group phases and phases based on how this view is set up. With that said, if you ever wanted to see multiple selections, you can do that. So we can click the drop down right here and enter into multi-select mode. Now each one of these has a checkbox. So if I check the box for say the 8000s and 9000s, I see both of those now combined in my filter. So again, another way of filtering items based on multiple selections on the left. We're applying two filters now at once. And I'm going to switch back to out of multi-select mode and display all items. So one important aspect of this window in terms of just being able to kind of sort through the list of items is this concept of these views. So I'm going to spend some time just kind of talking about the view options. So when I click this drop down right here, you see that there's some options to add a view, copy a view, edit, delete, and so forth. So in other words, this list we see here that only has one item in it can be expanded upon. And these view definitions are actually application-wide, or rather database-wide within Buyout. So even though we're within a specific Buyout package at the moment, you can define these views and use them across any Buyout package going forward in the future. So usually with your first Buyout package, it would make sense to spend some time and maybe create or customize the views in the way that's going to make the most sense for your workflow process, and then you have those views established going forward. So I'm going to show an example of doing that right now. So I'll click on Add View, and the first thing that Buyout wants to know is what the name of this view is going to be. So I'm going to simply call this Bill of Materials. And going down the list on the left of available columns, I can see that there are columns available from the company, the estimate, group phase, estimate item, all the WBS codes associated, estimate phase, quote group. So there's a lot of different related information that we can include as part of that grouping. So I'm going to keep my example fairly simple and use the bill of materials description. And so now the bill of materials description is going to represent sort of that top level node in the tree here. Now maybe I want some additional branches in the tree going underneath that, so I could do that by say going up here to group phase and include the group phase phase code as another grouping level, and maybe do the same thing with the estimate phase phase code. Okay, so now those are the grouping levels that are going to appear on the left side as sort of those quick filters for seeing my items. The sort order is going to apply to basically the default sort order that the items on the right are going to appear in. So by default, perhaps I want to show those in sort of the same order. So I'll say sort them by bill of materials description, then by group phase code. And of course you can use whatever sort order you want, whatever makes sense to you. Phase code, and then let's sort it one more level deep just by sorting it by item number. Okay. Then we do also need to have columns. So this applies to the set of columns that we see going left to right here. So that, again, is completely configurable. Right now there are no columns defined, so we do need to at least show something on the right so we can identify the items that we're working with. So again, I'm going to select some of the same things that I already have selected. So bill of materials description. I'm going to use the estimate phase code. Actually, let's since we're using bill of materials, let's go ahead and use bill of materials class as well, and then we'll include the phase code. And I could include the phase description if I wanted to as well. It's just how much horizontal space you want to use in the grid and what's going to be of help. Let's include the item number, the description. You should always include the number of units, the unit of measure, the unit price, and you should always include the amount. And then another required column is always going to be the group or the quote group description. And Buyout will recognize that specific field as a input field where we can identify the quote group that we're going to assign items to. But as I said, we can include any columns we want in this view. So if it made sense that you would use WBS1 because that contains some special information that would be of help during your organization of your buyout process, then by all means include WBS1. We can also include a filter. So this is like a set of conditions that says what this particular view is going to display. So by default we're going to display all items, but if you wanted to filter out certain items that don't apply in this case, you could add filters to condition on any field off of any of those tables that we were looking at a moment ago. Just to give you an idea what that looks like, basically you select the particular table that contains the data and the field name and whatever the comparison is and so forth, and you can establish whatever conditions are necessary to basically not show certain items. So once your view has been designed, and we click OK, and now in the drop-down list we see bill of materials. And so when I click on that, the list on the left changes now. So these nodes are all the bill of materials descriptions, and they again act as quick filters to filter the list of items to show only the items that are within those bill of materials. And since I defined group phase and phase as additional levels to group on, then I see those reflected here as well. And of course, like in that case, there was only one, and probably that's going to be the case with many of these. There's probably only one phase code underneath each one. But you can see the concept is that we can create as many grouping levels deep as we need to for whatever kind of sorting and organization we're trying to do to find the items that we need to work with. Okay, so that's how views are designed to work. Going over here to the right, I'll talk a little bit about the quote groups. And the quote group, in terms of the legacy 1X buyout product, think of the quote group as being the same thing as a quote sheet. So this is the grouping. So basically you'll notice, for example, like all of these items are assigned to the same quote group. That goes back to that setting and buyout options where I said to assign quote groups for material based on, and I had some options selected here, based on the bill of materials description. So that's how those ended up getting assigned in that manner. Is that a quote group got created based on each unique bill of materials description, and the items got assigned based on that. It might be more appropriate to use bill of materials class or some other combination of fields to assign the quote group, so you're in complete control of that, or to just simply not have Buyout assign the quote groups at all, in which case you can freely change that or create whatever quote groups you want. So as an example, I'll look at this item here, this subcontract one, and that was interesting. All right. We'll assign that to a quote group, hopefully. Maybe not. Again, this is the beta version, so let's work with one of these material items instead. So I'm going to try to remove that. Okay. Let's actually switch back to the other view, just in case there's a problem with my view there. Okay, so what I wanted to demonstrate was just how to edit the assigned quote group. So there's already a quote group assigned to this set of items. All I'm going to do is drag down over that list to select them all at once. Right click, which puts me into edit mode in that particular cell. And if I wanted to unassign them, I'll just tap the backspace key to remove what's there, press enter, and now all of those items are unassigned, and that's why they show up in a yellow color. And if I wanted to assign them to a different quote group now, there's a couple of different ways to do that. I can click the drop down and pick the quote group that I want to assign it to. I could also do that for many at once. So if I wanted to, say, take these three and assign them to all the same quote group, there's a bit of a trick in that in terms of how this grid works. You'll notice that when I try to do that, when I click the drop down, then it unselects the other two. So the way to actually do that is to right click on the drop down, and everything remains selected, and then select the item that you want and press enter. So that's how you would assign multiple items at once to a quote group. Otherwise, if you're creating a new quote group, there's a couple of ways to do that. I can simply type it and press enter, and I've created a new quote group. I could also go up here and define a new quote group this way. And in doing so, then that becomes an option in the drop-down list in the quote group column. I could also go up here and click on assign quote group, and then pick the appropriate quote group from the list that's already established, or create a new one, and then that gets applied to the line I'm currently on, or if I selected multiple items, it gets applied to all of them. That's also another way to unassign quote groups as well that I didn't talk about. So if I selected all three of those, I go up here to assign quote group and click unassign, then those get unassigned from a quote group. So that's sort of how that quote group assignment is designed to work. And again, ultimately the goal is to get all of your items assigned to a quote group, where that quote group represents ultimately a purchase order or subcontract that you intend to issue. You just might not be aware yet who the vendor is going to be. Some of the things about the group items grid to be aware of is the combine items option, which will just collapse things down that are similar, so or not similar but are the same. So if we have like the same set of codes, same description, those get collapsed down into one row. That makes it easier when I'm assigning quote groups, because there could be a line item now that actually represents like 10 items from the estimate, but it's now collapsed down to one row in the worksheet, so I can assign all 10 of those to the same quote group just by entering the quote group now for that line item. So that's what the combine items option does. I can also focus on only the things that are not yet assigned by checking this box. So I can see there's only 5 items that are not yet assigned to a quote group. It makes it a little easier to finish that work. And then the show details checkbox will expose a sort of a properties window on the right, and this is showing all the other fields that are maybe not displayed in the grid. So we had a lot of options to pick from when we defined the view. We had all 40 WBS codes and location and assembly name and all that stuff was available, but you might not want to see all of that in the grid. So this properties window allows me to still see those values on a given line item just by arrowing down to it or clicking on it. I can see, I can see those values over here. So that's the details window. By the way, this is resizable too. So if we want to use less horizontal space for the view, we can do that just by resizing. You can also sort this grid just by clicking on column headings. So sorting is pretty easy. We already talked about assigning the quote group via this button, and then also one-time items allows us to account for items that were not in the estimate, but we've determined that we need to include them in the buyout process nevertheless. So when we add a one-time item, we would associate that with the estimate that's in the buyout package already, and the respective phase code that it belongs to, whether it's material, subcontract, or what have you, description, unit price, etc. So we can, I'll just go ahead and add one just as an example here. So let's select a phase code, and we'll call it special shingles. And we're going to need 100 of those, and we're going to say they're $5 a piece. So when I click on add, an unexpected error occurred. Okay, that's again beta. That needs to be retested and worked out. What I was going to say was that when you click on add, that will add it to the worksheet. It'll display a little message here saying that it added the new one-time item, and this window remains open. But all the fields above get cleared, so you can then add another item and so forth, and it makes it a little more efficient if you have multiple one-time items to add. In that this window just stays open, you just enter the new information and click add for each one. If memory serves, I think the phase code and the category remain uncleared, so we're assuming that you might be adding multiple items under the same phase code, so those will just continue to stay there until you change them. But the description, units, unit measure, and so forth get cleared each time you click add, and then it sets you up for entering a new item. Okay, so we'll close that, and we'll go back and research that bug that came up here as well. Get that fixed as soon as possible. The other thing to be aware of in this window is the show option. So again, this is just another way of filtering the list down as we're working with it. So you might want to work only with material items right now, worry about subcontract items later, or equipment or what have you. So allows us a pretty quick and easy way to filter the list, by category or by type. Okay, so I think that is everything on the group items step. One thing I do want to do before we end this video is just to pop into the review tab real quick. Even though this step appears at the end, you don't have to wait until the end of the process to jump to that and see what's there. So the point is that this is just giving me an overview of the entire buyout process for this buyout package. And the first column here for the total shows me that there are actually 49 items that came from the estimate. amounting to $80,000 worth of estimated cost. And 48 of those are material, one of them is subcontract. And so if I look at the rows below this, I can see that that 6 are currently not assigned to a quote group, and 43 are assigned to a quote group. So it allows me to see visually at just a summary level where I'm at in the process. And I can see that so far I've not sent a request for quotes from any vendors. I've not received any pricing from any vendors, and I've not selected any vendors. That tells me where I'm at in this process. And at the very top, the bought out line would indicate where I've actually committed and created a commitment. And in this case, you can see obviously I've not committed anything yet either. The percent complete then would just be the percentage of what was what's been bought out as compared to what was estimated. Hence, the percent complete right now is 0. But ultimately, at the end of the process, of course, what we want to see is that the percent complete for this is 100%, meaning that we've bought out every item from the estimate. And that's showing both items, number of items from the estimate as well as the dollar amount. So again, you can pop in here anytime throughout the process and see where you're at and just account for everything. You'll also notice that on this deleted items row, we're accounting for items that you have removed from the buyout package, which we do allow for. And I'll just kind of cover that real quick. So you can definitely select items in the grid, tap your delete key, and delete those items from the worksheet. That is allowable to do that. That may be an option that we add some settings to in the future to maybe allow you at an application setting level to turn that feature on or off. But there were enough customers that had a business case for needing that it seemed necessary to include it. And I'll kind of state one of those business cases right now, and that is, let's say that you are a home builder and you have a sort of a template buyout package that represents a given model for a model home, along with all of its options. And maybe the options are identified in another field on the estimate, like a WPS code or some other property of the estimate item. So your workflow process may look like this, where you would begin by creating a buyout package by simply copying the model buyout package. And then you have all these items, and you have all the items for all the options as well. So if you were to organize this view so that options were listed out, so instead of group phases, maybe these were options on the model home, then I could go into multi-select mode and say, okay, in this particular case, we don't need options 1 and options 5. So now those are the options, those are the items for the options that I don't want. Select all, tap the delete key, remove those from your buyout package, and now you're down to the items that you actually need for that particular home, minus the options that were not selected. So that's how that would apply in the case of like a home builder scenario with model homes and options and whatnot. Hence why we need to allow that option to delete items. But the point of this review then is, if we allow you to delete items, and the whole purpose, one of the whole purposes of buyout is to make sure that we have accounted for everything that needs to be bought out, we need to account for those deleted items too. So ultimately what this would do is say there's 49 items from the original estimate, we deleted 5. And so when we're looking at our percent complete, we're comparing what's been bought out to what was estimated less what was deleted. So we're accounting for the fact that we deleted some. And those records remain in the database, by the way. There are no reports at the moment that expose that, but those items remain in the database. So even though you might have deleted them, it's what we call a soft delete. So they're just flagged as having been deleted, but the item is still there. So again, allows for better accountability in terms of being able to produce a report at some point showing here's everything that's been bought out, and here are the specific things that we deleted that we determined weren't necessary. So that's what that's all about. All right, so I think that covers everything on this step. So we'll wrap up this video, and in the next step we will talk about selecting vendors, getting price quotes, and entering prices and selecting the vendors that we intend to use.